93 were found to have drugs in their system. So, yes, fish drug tests are a thing now. History is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Matt, I've been getting really into seafood, despite the fact that the marine systems are collapsing around us, or maybe partially because of it. I want to ask you if you've ever heard of a little something called the bonefish, all one word, not bonefish grill.
Yeah, that's literally where my brain went. The bonefish sounds naughty, but I like it. Tell me about it.
It probably, it makes me think that if Sublime had been able to stay together longer, ultimately, they would have released something called bonefish. Well, the bonefish describes usually a thing called albula vulpes, and it can be a pretty big fish. It's not ever going to be as like popular as salmon, and there are a couple of different ways to eat it, et cetera, et cetera. But I started learning a lot about the bonefish in particular thanks to someone who reached out to me at Ben Bolin on Instagram. I've got a lot of our fellow conspiracy realists. I want to thank you for reaching out to me on Instagram. I read every email we get. Matt does too. But sometimes it's a little bit easier for me to keep track of things. And we always try to preserve anonymity. But in this case, my friend, and we had a conversation about this. In this case, my apologies to you because I couldn't find your name, and credit is very important to me. So please, please, please reach out as soon as you hear this and just say, hey, asshole, I'm the guy who told you about those bonefish. And I will shout you out on air because you deserve it. And you took the time to write to our show. Regardless of the avenue, we are grateful for it. Here's the story, Matt. Bonefish are not just, pretty delicious. A little cut of fish for seafood fans. If you're off the coast of Florida, you're going to find that they're also on drugs. As our soon-to-be non-anonymous Instagram pal of mine hipped me to this, it turns out that there was a study released that found dozens of pharmaceutical drugs were inundating the blood and tissue of fish off the coast of South Florida. And we're talking multiple things. Some of the stuff that people consider fun, like Valium, some of the stuff people consider necessary, like antidepressants and blood pressure meds. I want to shout out Nick Castillo, who's a scientist with the Florida International University, and the Bonefish and Tarpon Trust, who broke down some of this study, which you can read about in multiple sources now. Castillo says, we found pharmaceuticals everywhere, and there was no place where basically a fish could be unexposed to pharmaceuticals, and that was a surprise. Matt, they tested 93 bonefish in particular as part of this study across 3 years, and of the 93 they tested, 93 were found to have drugs in their system. So yes, fish drug tests are a thing now. And it wasn't just one drug per fish. It wasn't like the one fish was getting high. The average number of drugs found in the bodies of each of these fish was seven different drugs, pharmaceutical drugs. Some had as many as 16 distinctly different types of drugs in their system.
Wow.
I know these
and
fish.
Ben, you mentioned several types of drugs. I don't want to be ageist in any way. This is my personal experience. Most of the travel I've done in Florida, or to Florida rather, was to visit grandparents, to hang out in, communities that are specifically retirement communities. Many of the drugs described sound like I don't mean to be ageist. It sounds like retirement community medications, right? Didn't you say blood thinners and
Blood
all
thinners
kinds
were
of
a
stuff
big
like that?
one. Yeah, antidepressants. And also prostate treatment medications. I'm going to back you up
Yep.
on this one, Matt.
Yep.
Antibiotics, pain
Uh huh.
relievers.
Uh huh.
The the news release that I found on this, straight from Florida International University, paints a sobering picture of this, because what they found was a contamination cycle leading through the food chain. Bonefish eat other fish, and they eat crabs, and they eat shrimp, and the crabs, the shrimp, the fish that are prey for the bonefish were also found to have these substances in them. And you've nailed it, because you have to look at the demographics here, right? Again, not being ageist. Not that it really needs to be said, but clearly we're just following the facts here. The smart money right now is on the idea that bonefish and other animals in the ecosystem are encountering these substances by interacting with human waste. There are right now, every year in the United States alone, about 5 billion prescriptions filled. And there are no environmental regulations for the disposal of pharmaceuticals. It is the wild, doped up West. The contaminants in this problem usually come from human wastewater, and your typical waste treatment plant isn't going to filter for that sort of stuff. It doesn't really exist to a wastewater filtration algorithm. They're just not built to think about that. But the issue is, those things, those substances, are powerful. They remain active, they can be released constantly, and exposure can affect all aspects of fish behavior. We don't exactly know how far it goes, we being the scientists, but we know that it has negative consequences on things like reproduction, things like odds of survival to the extent of their natural lifespan. Also, these things can, in other parts of the world, we know that they can affect fish feeding, their interactions with other fish, and their migratory behavior. This has led the researchers of this study to say Florida needs to expand and modernize wastewater treatment facilities and sewage infrastructure across the state. Initial question for me was, does this affect the human consumer? Which was admittedly a very self-centered thing to ask, but does it affect? It's a question anybody in Florida would ask reading this headline. How does this
Yeah.
affect me, right?
Yeah. Do we not have to pay for medications anymore? Do we just eat local seafood?
Right. I can't afford my prescription, so I guess I'll become a pescatarian. Right. Is that the yeah? It seemed, I also thought of mercury level warnings, which were really, really common thing. Several years ago, people were warned to watch their consumption of certain maritime wildlife, with the idea being that it could lead to mercury contamination. There's some stuff that really alarmed the scientists here, including Jennifer Rahage, Rehage, the lead researcher, ecologist, and associate professor at FIU. Not for nothing did she say these findings are incredibly alarming. Quote, pharmaceuticals are an invisible threat, unlike algal blooms or turbid waters, yet these results tell us that they are a formidable threat to our fisheries and highlight the pressing need to address our long-standing wastewater infrastructure issues. Dude, we talk about it all the time. No one cares about infrastructure, really. It doesn't get the votes. It's boring to talk about. It's not a problem with a human face, right? And if it's not a problem with a human face or like a celebrity attached to it, then people don't really care until the bridges start collapsing, right? Until the water coming out of the faucet turns the wrong color or catches on fire.